With the release a couple days ago of the new Metallurgy collection from the fine folks at Line 6, I've already received a fairly large number of questions concerning its comparison to Helix Native. I've had questions such as, is this just a stripped down version of Helix Native? Does it sound the same? Why would I buy Metallurgy if I already own Helix Native? And the questions keep going on. In this video, I'm going to take a look at a very in-depth comparison between the two so that you can maybe make your decision as to whether you need one, the other, or maybe even both. I can say honestly, I'm very happy to have both, but that's really going to end up in the end being about personal preference and what our final needs are. So we're also going to discuss, is there a sound difference, which is really probably one of the most important points. So without further ado, let's dive right in and take a look at this comparison of the Metallurgy collection and Line 6 Helix Native. So here we are over in Cubase, where I have 4 instances of plugins open here. I have Line 6 Modern, Line 6 Doom, and Line 6 Thrash, which are all from the new Metallurgy collection. And I also have down here Helix Native. Before we get to any actual playing, I am going to talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons that some folks might find between these different pieces of software. First of all, starting with Metallurgy. Some of the pros to it, this is really going to be quite subjective, and there's going to be varying viewpoints on these things I'm going to say. So in no way am I suggesting that what I'm saying here is carved in stone. I'm just throwing some ideas around. Some folks love the graphical user interface. They have the real amps. They have kind of these knobs, just like we would turn on a real amplifier. One big complaint I've heard and read a lot about on Helix Native and HX Edit for that matter, is the sliders to control the parameters. It's not very much like what we would do in real life. We don't see the visual representation of an amp or an effects pedal or a cabinet. So I hate to say that Metallurgy fixes this because some folks might not find that a fix. I really like it. But at the same time, I'm also okay with the sliders. I'm very much used to using them. But again, it's really going to come down to personal preference. But that is one perceived benefit of the Metallurgy collection, is just that we can actually see the amps and the cabs as we would and as close to real life as I think is possible in the virtual software realm. Another real pro to Metallurgy is the new cab room, where we can select from a smaller number of cabs, mind you, but we can select the cab and then move our microphone around in virtual space to see where it is on the speaker cone. We can even angle the mics by 45 degrees. We also have this room mic that we can put in to add some natural room ambience. We have some control over that and a couple different mics we can choose from. All very, very handy stuff and a very big pro to the Metallurgy collection. Another pro of the Metallurgy collection is the addition of some models that we don't at present have in the Helix. And I really don't know if it's in the cards that these will be added to the Helix. I would hope they would be. It would be very nice. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be, but I really have no knowledge about whether they are going to be or not. But what we do have is we have this vitriol amp in the modern Metallurgy collection, which is a model of the PV Invective 120. And over here in the Doom version of the Metallurgy plugin, we have the Moon amplifier, which is a model of a Sun Model T. And I must say, 2 of my favorite amps inside of Metallurgy. I absolutely loved working with both of these when I was testing the software out. We also get a couple of new distortion pedals, and both of them are models of distortion pedals from Earthquaker devices. Up here we have the Vital Distortion, which is part of the Doom collection, and that is an Earthquaker devices Life Octave distortion boost pedal. And down here in the Thrash collection, we have the Pillars Overdrive, which is an Earthquaker devices Plumes Overdrive. All very, very nice models and wonderful additions to anybody's collection for dialing in tones. I think another maybe not so obvious benefit to Metallurgy is also maybe the lack of option paralysis that potentially some folks have with Helix. There's so many models, so many cabs, so many effects, so many routing possibilities, and just so many possibilities overall in Helix and Helix Native that sometimes people get overwhelmed with it and they find that they don't know where to start or where to end with their tone creation and preset creation. Whereas in Metallurgy, I find that that's a little bit better. Although with the cab room, some could argue we'd have more potential for option paralysis because of the fact we can move the microphones around. But it's done in a very real world manner, like we would move a microphone around the studio. So for somebody who has any studio experience, that's not going to be a huge issue, which is nice. Another positive for Metallurgy is just the layout of it. It's very easy to get around. We have our little pull down menu here with our capo and our noise reduction. We can hide that if we don't want to see it. We can move around very easily. And like I mentioned before, the visual makes it a real pleasure to use. Now, what are some of the pros of Helix Native? Well, obviously, it's the number of options we have. If my count is correct, we have, I believe, 73 amp models in the Helix, whereas Metallurgy at first view only has 12, 4 in each of the different versions. Although, to be fair, I would say that if comparing it to Helix and Helix Native, in a fair fashion, we would have to say that Metallurgy actually has 18 amp models for the simple reason that some of these come with 2 channels. So for instance, the vitriol lead and crunch channel, whereas in the Helix, that would usually end up being 2 different versions or 2 different separate amplifiers in the Helix. We would have vitriol lead as one block and then vitriol crunch as another, whereas in Metallurgy, it's all in the 1 amp. So if we add all of the ones up, such as the Moon here, where we have bright, jump, and normal channels, I believe we end up with either 18 or 19 if I counted correctly. So there is a little more than meets the eye with Metallurgy when we look at it in a proper, fair comparison to the Helix. But obviously Helix Native wins simply for the number of options we have, the number of effects, the number of cabs we have. Obviously down here you can see we have a lot of different stock cabs built right in. Both have the ability to use third-party impulse responses, so that's not an issue on either side of it. You know, and there's a lot of similar features between the two. Both have tuners built in that we can set to like needle to strobe or coarse, fine, and strobe down here on Helix Native. Both are MIDI controllable. We have undo, redo. So a lot of the same possibilities there. One massive, massive advantage, and I think a lot of folks will agree with me on this, to the Metallurgy collection is that they also come in standalone versions. We don't have to host it as a plugin within a DAW. We can do that, but we don't have to. So the standalone version, I think, is a real bonus. Now, having said all that, you might kind of deduct that I'm leaning heavily towards Metallurgy. Well, Metallurgy also does have its drawbacks in that it doesn't have as many models, as I mentioned already. So, you know, if I really wanted maximum flexibility in tone creation, I'm thinking Helix Native is going to win in that department. But ultimately, this is going to come down to how both of them sound. And this is a question I've received a lot. Do they sound the same? Does one sound better than another? And a lot of that is going to be subjective too, and there's going to be so many variables involved that I think the only way we can do this is if I actually play you some samples and let you decide for yourself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick, obviously we can't use the vitriol or the Moon model, simply because those don't exist in the Helix. But what I did do, and I'm going to do 2 things here. Let's get rid of the Modern and the Doom, and I'm going to slide Helix Native up here so that we can kind of see what I'm soloing over here. Now, I've done videos on all of the Metallurgy collection already. I'll put links to those below in the description if I actually remember to do so. I'm really bad for that sometimes. So I'm not going to be going through a full demo of all the Metallurgy plugins, but just for comparison purposes now. So what I've done is I've taken the Placator Dirty amp model that we have down here in Metallurgy Thrash. I've set all the settings just straight up the board at 5. I've turned off Fat C45, HB and saturation, master presence, treble, mid, bass, and gain all at 5. And I matched those settings over here. The channel volume I've just set so that it's at the same volume, so we hear the same volume between the two. But if you'll notice, I turned off all of those extra settings. I didn't touch the deeper functions on Helix Native, but all the settings are exactly the same. Now, I have 2 snapshots here for good reason you'll see in a moment. For now, I'm calling this one Thrash IR. So this is just Helix Native with nothing on it. But what I am going to engage, if you see over here, I'm going to engage another instance of Thrash below it. But if you'll notice what I've done here is I've turned everything off except for the cab block. I have capo off, noise reduction off, focus filter off, the EQ at the end is off, the amp, pre-effects, and post-effects are off. So it's just acting as a cab for the Placator Dirty inside of Helix Native. And if you come over here to compare it to, and you'll notice I've labeled this native comparison, I have the amp with all those settings going into the identical settings that we have over here for Helix Native. So what we're doing here is we're just seeing how the amp modeling compares between the two. So we're running the amp modeling out of Helix Native into the new cab room of Metallurgy with the same settings on both, just to compare how these settings on the amp measure up by taking that variable of different impulse responses out. After this, though, and after we hear what this sounds like, what I am going to do is compare the new cab room inside of Metallurgy to the stock cabs in Helix. So it'll be interesting stuff. So I'll just close this window down. And what we're hearing now is a comparison between just the Placator Dirty, both going through the same settings on the new Metallurgy cab room. So what we're going to have over here is this channel is Helix Native. Then I'm going to switch over to Metallurgy Thrash, and we're going to hear the same comparison with the Placator Dirty here. Now let me go back and forth between them without any talking in between so we can hear them closer back to back. What'd you guys think? I think they're pretty darn close. Very, very close. I wouldn't say there's a big enough sound difference, if any, that would really lean more towards one or the other. But what we do want to do now is another comparison. So I'm going to come over here to Native Comparison 2. And what I've done here is I've picked a 412 XXL V30 cab, just like up here. And what I need to do is disengage the Thrash plugin after acting as the IR, because we're going to engage the stock cab on Helix Native. So now we're going to hear those same settings on the amp feeding into the stock cab, which is a 412 XXL V30, same cabinet as we have down here in Metallurgy, but we're going to just be focusing on the 160 ribbon, 1 inch back, just like I've done here. I'm assuming it's right on the center. This is an assumption I have to make. I don't know if that's how these were done. And again, I have all the other settings the same, low and high cut turned off. Now, this is obviously going to sound different, but this is going to now be comparing the stock cabs in the Helix to this cab room, this new cab room that we have inside of Metallurgy. So again, here we have, this is going to be Helix Native. Now we'll switch over to the Metallurgy collection version of this. Go back and forth. obviously different, as it would be expected, as they're completely different IRs, essentially. Now, obviously, we have the massive advantage in Metallurgy of adding a second microphone in with great ease, panning them, adding a room mic in, moving the microphone around on and off axis and angling it. So, you know, much more flexible in Metallurgy, obviously, but I still do think the stock cabs and the Helix measure up nicely. Again, between the two of those, I think it would just come down to a personal preference. But for workflow, I believe it would be very nice to work inside of Metallurgy just for the tweakability of being able to move the microphones around, making some fine little tweaks a little bit quicker and giving it a bit of a nicer workflow. All right, so there you have it. What do you guys think? Ultimately, the decision is going to be up to each of us as individuals to decide what works best for us. There's the pros and cons that, as I kind of see it. Please leave me in the comments below the pros and cons that you see, because I obviously cannot cover all of them. And we're all going to see different pros and cons with these situations based off of our needs and our ideals and our opinions on the matter, and those are all valid. I guess in the end, it's just really nice that we have all these tools available to us, and even owning both of these is a really nice thing. We could take Helix Native and run them through the new cabs and use the new cab room with the movable mics, just as I showed we can do here, which is another option. So owning both would be a nice thing also. So anyways, I hope that was useful to you guys, and I hope that answered some of the questions that I've been getting over the last few days, and I hope that helps you maybe make a decision as to which one of these you want. I would say just get both if you can. They're both nice to have. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it, and also subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much. Ciao for now.